So welcome to our ACE Personnel and Services webinar. And as we get started, we will go ahead and disclaim everyone. This presentation was produced under U.S. Department of Education contract number GS00F115CA with Synergy Enterprises, Inc. The views expressed herein do not necessarily represent the positions or policies of the U.S. Department of Education. No official endorsement by the U.S. Department of Education of any product, commodity, service, or enterprise mentioned herein is intended or should be inferred. All right. So today, just like our title says, we're really going to spend a little chunk of time talking about services. There's a lot of interest in kind of talking through a bit more about what services everyone was planning to provide or thinking about providing. And then a bulk of our time we'll probably spend on personnel and talking through some of the guidance around personnel. We also have a few reminders, as many of you might be starting to head from your planning period into your implementation period, either now or in the coming months. And then a few reminders about other upcoming events coming your way. As we go through, because we do have a larger group today, we will have everyone muted just to make it easier to hear. But if you have questions at any point, please pop those in the chat box. We do want to try to get as many questions answered as possible. So pop those over in the chat box as they come up for you, and we will get to them as we go through. So I'm Sarah Brightwell. I think I've met a great many of you on our various webinars so far this year. And I'll turn it over to Bianca.
Hello, everyone. I'm Bianca Williams. I am here and alive and getting to all your emails. I do apologize for anyone who's still waiting for anything. We are getting to it and trying to work out a lot of things. And I really hope this presentation helped with some of that work.
Thanks, Bianca. All right. So we're going to leap right into services. As we think about that, some of the key things that we really want to make sure everyone understands is that through the ACE program, services are available for pre-K through 12 students. So that means that we cannot be providing services to post-secondary students or adult, family, or community members. And that's a little bit different than how it's been in some of the other grant programs. But really important to remember that for the ACE program, services are solely for the pre-K through 12 students. And you may have described some services potentially in your proposal that discussed services to some post-secondary students or adult, family, or community members, but those are not actually allowable activities. So through like your budget revision, you would need to revise to only be providing services to the allowable age groups. And really important to think through as you're preparing to implement and create your menu of services that you're going to be offering. The second piece of that is really talking through the various educational options that you can provide. So this information you would have seen in a lot of the application materials back when you were in the proposal phase, and we've talked about it on a couple of our webinars, but we haven't really had a lot of time to dive into it. These are the 12 categories of types of activities that are allowable under the ACE program. So I just want to kind of look at each one before we dive in a bit more. So things like native language, history, or culture courses. Also advanced remedial or elective courses, which could potentially be online. So particularly as we think about those two, remembering that we have to supplement what's already occurring through whether it be the school day or other services already available to our students. We can't supplant those services. So if there's already, say, a native language course going on at our school, we can't just take over the payment for that particular course. We would need to be adding new services above and beyond what's already available to our students. So that might mean currently your school provides native language courses for K-5, and maybe through ACE, you're going to provide the option for students to participate in a native language course at the junior high level for 6th through 8th grade. So that could be one option that your families could select from, but it would need to be above and beyond what's already available. Then you'll see the next option are apprenticeships or training programs that could lead to industry certifications. And I know there's a number of folks who are doing some things along that line. You can also do some concurrent and dual enrollment. And I think sometimes there might be some confusion there because we said no post-secondary students, but it's because the student themselves is currently a secondary student. They're currently within the pre-K through 12. So even though they're going to be doing maybe a concurrent enrollment situation or a dual enrollment situation and earning college credits, that's wonderful. But technically they're still maybe an 11th grader. So they're still within the service range. They're just getting the added benefit of some additional programs that will get them college credits. Tuition for private school or home education expenses. We also have special education and related services that are supplementary to those otherwise required. And again, that's really key with all of these, that it needs to be supplementary to what's already available. And that particularly comes into play with any special education type services, that there are a number of services that are already required to be provided to a student who has been identified as having special education needs. And so what we would then provide through ACE would need to be in addition to those services that are required to be provided. We can't be providing those through the ACE funds. The next one, number 7, is books, materials, or education technology, including learning software or hardware that are accessible to all children. So this one is one that has been a little bit more broad. I think there's been a few questions about. So for one, this can't be, I'm going to buy school supplies and it's available to all the kids at the school and they can use it as needed, or I'm going to distribute it to the teachers to use as needed. Remember that ACE is all about the students and families selecting to partake in a particular service option that you're offering. So if you're going to be doing school supplies, that would need to be one of your service options. So if you have a menu of, say, 5 options that you're going to be providing, one of those could be school supplies. And a family or student could select the school supply option. And if they select that, then maybe you provide them with, say, a backpack that has the basic school supplies for them for the year. Okay, so that's what kind of the difference there is, just generally purchasing supplies or materials versus very specifically creating a service option that students and families can opt into and select. There's also been some questions about hardware. My suggestion with hardware, first of all, really think about that supplement and supplant piece. If there's already hardware available to your students, or available to your students through other funding streams. There's been a lot of hardware funding streams available because of COVID and the pandemic and lots of distance learning situations. So we want to make sure that if they're already receiving that option through someone else, we're not supplanting that. So my prime suggestion for any hardware type expenses is put that together, what you want to do in an email, send it to Bianca and get some feedback before moving forward with that, because that one has a lot more nuance to it than some of the others. So that's a good one to always make sure and get some feedback before making big hardware purchases. The next one is tutoring. This is another one that's really important to keep in mind, that this is tutoring above and beyond what's already available to your students through the school. So if they're already doing some tutoring, we can't take that over, but we can provide above and beyond that, whether it be through particular providers, online, in person, whatever's feasible, but above and beyond. Number 9, summer or after school education programs and student transportation needed for those specific programs. And it says, those could include instruction in the arts, music, sports, to the extent that you can demonstrate that those are culturally related or are supported by evidence that suggests the service may have a positive effect on relevant educational outcomes. So when you're thinking about that, if you're saying, well, we want to do a soccer class, you need to have a why behind it, beyond because it would be really fun. Okay, so you have to be able to tie that to being culturally related or having a positive impact on education outcomes. Those are the two kind of key things with those pieces, is as we're looking at all of those kind of additional programs that we might be able to add, there's lots of great programs that could be a value add, but we just want to make sure that we're looking at them through the lens of, are they going to be either culturally related or positively impacting those educational outcomes? And that's really kind of the test to see if that's something that we are going to be able to provide. And that's something that may also come up as you're getting feedback from families, that you may have some families who are interested in a particular service, but unfortunately, they aren't culturally related or tied to educational outcomes. So you may not be able to add that particular service. The other piece of number 9 that's come up a few times is in regards to transportation. So yes, it is allowable to use funds for transportation. No, it is not allowable to just provide transportation for all to anything. It again has to be an option. So families or students could sign up for the service option that they will need transportation. So just always thinking about, how can we make this something that they can actually opt into? Not everybody gets this. They have to be able to select those options. The next one is number 10, testing preparation and application fees, including for private school and graduating students. So a lot of the things that I've seen people providing under this one are things like SAT and ACT prep, or prep for things like AP exams, things like that, so that you're providing additional tutoring or testing support beyond what's already available to them. For number 11, the supplemental counseling services. The big things to remember here are, again, in addition to the counseling services already available, but also that it cannot include psychiatric or medical services. So that's an important caveat on the counseling piece. It can't be anything psychiatric or medical. And then number 12, kind of the catch-all category, other education-related services that are reasonable and necessary for the project. And I think, the big things that stand out for me in number 12 are education-related. So like we were talking about before in number 9, is it culturally related, or is it going to have a positive impact on education outcomes? Well, that's what they're talking about with number 12 too, is this educationally related? If it's not, it's probably not going to be an allowable piece. If it doesn't fall into one of the first 11 and it's not educationally connected, it's probably not going to be an allowable service option. And the second kind of thing that stands out is the reasonable and necessary. So I know that can be a bit subjective, but just thinking through, what is reasonable and necessary to provide for my students in order to help them be academically successful. All right, so I see a couple of questions before we kind of dive deeper into these. So can we expand already available options, or does the option itself need to be new? So it's going to kind of depend on how you're expanding. So yes, you can expand upon something that already exists, but it has to be clear how that's an expansion, how that's separate and different from what's already available. So like, for instance, we were talking about the tutoring. If there's only math tutoring available to certain students and you want to expand it to a different group of students, then that would be allowable. Just taking over the expense for that existing math tutoring would not be allowable. If math tutoring is only available maybe 1 hour a week, and through your needs assessment, you've seen that's not nearly enough tutoring for the math academic needs of your students, then maybe you're going to be providing, if they do 1 hour on Mondays, maybe you're providing 2 hours on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So again, you can see how it's very separate and different than what's already being provided, even though it's a similar type of service. So that's what would be key. And then again, the students and families would need to sign up for that particular tutoring option. So, and if that didn't quite get to the heart of your question, Katie, just pop in the chat box, let me know. The second piece, could you offer a definition of services to adult family members that are not allowable? For instance, for pre-K and early education children, would family literacy supports be allowable? So I'm going to take the first part of the question, and Bianca may want to chime in on the specific family literacy supports. But in general, the activities have to be specifically for the students. Now, if it's an activity for the students that a parent might be participating alongside them, then that could potentially be allowable. But if the primary participant or the sole participant is the adult family member, that's when it's unallowable. So by that, I would mean if the kids are there at the service, but they're just kind of sitting there, they're not actually the ones engaging in the activity, or they're participating in childcare, and the real targeted participant in the activity is that adult family member, that's not going to be allowable. If you're potentially doing like a workshop for students on how to fill out the FAFSA, and it's something that they would be participating in alongside their parent, because really helpful to have your parent there for that type of budgetary conversation and looking at finances, where they're going to be side by side sitting and walking through the FAFSA together as a family unit, then that could be allowable, because at that point, it is the student who's receiving that service. The parent is just participating to help them alongside. So I'm hoping that kind of helps with that one. All right. I'm looking here. If tutoring services were supported by NYCP and that grant ends, can we resume with tutoring funded by the ACE grant? So the first thing would be, you can't just pick up where you left off, because again, you have to have students selecting that option. So they would have to go through that service selection process. You couldn't just seamlessly pick up where you know, if your NYCP, say, is on extension and ends the end of January, you couldn't start on February 1st with that same group of kids and just keep going, unless you can document you've put in place a service selection process, and those students and their families have selected to partake in that particular piece, as well as looking at, you know, if you had not gotten the grant funding, what was going to happen with that tutoring? Did you already have funding in place, and were you already going to provide it throughout the year? All right, if college tours is one of your options, could a parent accompany their student? So with that, as long as it's the student participating, and it's a student-driven activity, if you want to allow the parents to accompany so that they're participating in that together, that should be allowable. So you would just want to look at how you're designing that activity and setting it up, but that should be okay. Let's see. Clarence brings up a good question. If a program is falling short of funds to provide more services needed, can this be considered supplemental? So I'm going to kind of toss this one to Bianca as a very finite question, because if you were already going to be providing a service this year, but now funding is running short, can you then kind of take over that particular service as a supplemental service?
Yeah, so I definitely think it comes down to, the selection of what the students would like from it. So if it's already being offered, and like Sarah had a good example, maybe you can offer it again on another day, maybe at a different time. But it definitely has to be an increase or a change from what's already being offered. If it's only offered to one grade, maybe you're expanding it to more grades. But if it's for the same program that's going exactly at the same time and you just need more supplies, I think that there should still be some expansions, especially if you're providing the service. Also, yeah, I can leave it at that then.
Yeah. Well, then the next question is about summer credit recovery camps. And Karen, this is a great example. So Karen's example is she has students from the Northern Plains tribes, and the horse culture is significant in Native American language, history, and culture, and they're working with schools to earn academic credits. So if that is a new service, they haven't been offering that service before, then that actually would kind of qualify under multiple educational options here, because if you're doing credit recovery and earning academic credits, you've got that piece in place as well as that cultural piece. So that would definitely, if that's a new service option, a new activity, that would definitely be an allowable activity.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we're going to come back and cover more here, but I do want to give you a little bit more information here just to give you an idea on more about the services. We have been going through all of the proposals and all of the great information that you provided within those. And I wanted to give you an idea as you look across the 40 ACE grantees, what types of services are being provided. Now, granted, these are just breaking it down into the 12 categories, but giving you an idea of what other people are doing as well. So you can see 85% of the ACE grantees are providing something that falls into that category of summer or after school education programming, and also really high on the Native language, history, and culture. And as we go down, I mean, really a lot of folks are offering a wide variety of those service options and doing a lot of different things in each of their communities. The two lowest number, as far as number of grantees actually approaching that particular service category, are the special education and related services and the tuition for private school or other education expenses, which kind of makes sense as far as those definitely being more specific services that may or may not be applicable to all of your settings. So there are fewer folks who are addressing those particular categories. You can see otherwise, it's half or more of the grantees offering these types of services. And as we think a little bit further, I want to just bring us back to, a lot of you, many of you are in your planning period. And so while you may have had some general idea of the services that you were going to be offering, you're fine tuning that and getting that really solidified to be able to put out those service options to your students and families. And so as we think about, how should you be choosing those educational services to offer, bringing you back to your community needs assessment and your evidence basis. So, how do we know that our students and families need this particular service? And how do we know that this particular service will address that need? Think about the process of selecting providers that are going to result in high quality options for your families. And I know for some services, you may only have one provider option, but for others, you may have more than one option available. And particularly, as we've seen through distance learning, sometimes that is opening up some other service provider options that we might not typically be using, because we can magically beam people in some instances. Think about really high quality service choices, including culturally relevant services. And then I really like this next to last one. making sure that it's related to your project focus, because even if you didn't delineate out exact services in your proposal that you were going to be offering, everybody in your proposal discussed what your focus for your project was. And so make sure that you're always coming back to that project focus and what your intent was for your students and their families. And then think about that family feedback. You know, as part of the ACE project, you are required to be getting family feedback. So how are you going to use that? How can you be using that even now during your planning period to inform those educational services that you're going to offer? All right. And I did see a question about putting some of this information in the chat box. We will make this recording and slides available after this, but that is a great tip as we go forward into upcoming sessions. So we'll look into that as well. Thank you. So I do want to do just a little bit of brainstorm. In the interest of time, because we did do quite a few questions on the other one, I'm going to ask that we do this actually in the chat box, because it'll be a little bit easier to run through than having everybody annotate on the screen. So think about, what services do you plan to provide? So I know, again, many of you are still solidifying that plan during your planning period, but share with us, what types of services at this point are you thinking about providing or know that you'll be providing? While you're putting that into the chat box, I'm going to actually address Stephanie's question, because I think it's one that many people are going to be thinking about. If a parent fills out a needs survey and requests a specific service from a specific vendor that isn't currently an option, are we required to use that vendor for a service? So you do not have to use a specific provider. So let's say that you're offering SAT tutoring and you're offering it through provider A, and a family reaches out and says, but I would really like SAT tutoring from provider B. You're already providing that service. So unless there's a particular reason that provider B maybe is providing something totally different, that you then would see, okay, there might be benefit in providing similar services through two different providers. But in general, if you've already done your due diligence and selected what you feel to be a high quality provider for that particular service, you're not required to then provide it through every provider available, just because people may have some interest in different ones.
Can I also tag in on that? You are required to have a parent feedback system in place. And if you remember the Gipper measures, some of them ask, like, how long did it take, or how many services may have been changed because of it. You're not required to change or add the service, but you are required to give reasons why you're not able to. Also, one thing that I want you guys to keep in mind is like the scope of your project, or what you're aiming to your project should stay the same. So if you are completely focused on college readiness, you want to have activities and programs that align with that. And if a parent is asking for swimming lessons or something, and that doesn't really align with college readiness, just make sure that the services and the options that are available still align with the scope of your project.
Perfect. And thank you for everybody who's been putting the services that they plan to provide in the chat box. And for those who may be trying to frantically copy that down, we'll send that information out, so you don't have to try to be capturing all of that. But you can see lots of supplemental kind of SAT, ACT things, lots of dual credit, lots of cultural and language activities, lots of college and career pieces, lots of good things going on. I do want to also get some feedback on if there are services that you would like to provide, but maybe you need some additional resources. Maybe you're not sure about what types of providers might be available beyond the ones that you already know about, or you're not sure what other people are doing to address that need, and it's something maybe you'd like to address, but you're just not sure how. Let us know that in the chat box as well. And just to make sure that it's kind of a little bit easier to denote, maybe put need and then your information. And that way we know those are things that we can address through these webinars or follow up with you specifically or through the talking sticks, and really kind of take all of our collective information and help one another. All right. We'll keep looking at those questions and answering those, but I do want to flip over to the personnel side, because I know that is another piece that we've had lots of questions about, and we want to make sure and be able to talk about today too. So for personnel, I'm going to turn it over to Bianca to give you some great information.
Yes. So, reviewing all of the budgets, I think personnel is one of those topics or subjects that we definitely needed to touch on again. And, please submit any questions you do have. This project is completely new, so we're still trying to figure it out with you guys as well. So if we cannot answer it, we will work with our program attorneys and get the correct answer. And we know not one size fits all. I do know that this competition is very complex, and I, definitely congratulate you guys for, applying to it, but there's still a lot of work that we need to work out and fix before, we can implement these projects to make sure they are doing what it was intended to do. Next slide. So the biggest thing is that ACE is not NYCP. Pretty much every single budget that was submitted could have worked for NYCP, but I believe I've only approved 2 or 3 so far that's worked for ACE. A lot of questions are just regarding around personnel. So, we have some questions for you guys and some resources that we wanted to give out for the personnel as well. That works for ACE. So next slide. So 83%, 33 out of the 40 grantees plan to provide services along with external service providers. Based on the applications, 7 or 17% plan to use only external service providers. And really, as you know, that 83% is where it's tricky with the personnel. When you have the personnel that's providing services for the grantee. So that's kind of what we're going to dig more into. Next slide. So this is, I believe we had these pyramids before in previous PowerPoints, but this kind of just shows the difference between the 2 examples. That, the majority is example 1, where they are the service provider number 4, you're the grantee. So under NYCP before, you're able to provide all the services. Under ACE, you have to work with other service providers, but you also can be one of the service providers. It's not mandatory for you to be one of the service providers. So in example 2, it shows you a pyramid where all the services are provided externally. Next slide. I'm sorry, can you go back? I missed a big point. That the top of the pyramid, where we have a 20% breakdown, that's the ACE project cost. So that's the darker portion. That's what's holding, all the service providers together. If it's connecting students with the service providers, if it's marketing the service providers, if it's admin staff to work with me or Sarah, if it's counselors that's going to assign students services, you know, everything that's kind of holding or connecting the students to the services would be the structural cost of ACE, or admin cost of ACE, or indirect cost as well. Under this program, 80% of the funds have to be direct services. So that's all the service providers. So as you see in the lighter greenish color, that's, you know, showing how 80% of the funds have to be direct services. And now we can move on. So what is considered a direct service? Here's some examples of direct service. Teaching a language class, teaching a cultural arts class, teaching SAT and ACT prep classes, providing ongoing counseling services, driving transportation for students, tutoring students on academic content. So what's not considered direct services? One I want to relate that's not considered is travel for you know, the staff to students. Oops, the screen just changed. That would not be included for transportation. So if, you know, you have a large site that you're providing services to and it's an hour away, that time between the location the provider is and to the student would not be direct services. That could be a part of the cost that is contracted, but that's not something that the student will be selecting or beneficial to the student. So that's where, you know, when we're talking about 80%, it's all for what the student will be selecting. So things like curriculum writing, yeah, the student might use the curriculum, but unless it's a class on writing curriculum, that is not a direct service. Also, one thing I want to know is that we cannot use these funds to build the capacity for projects. So services should be implemented already, ready to go. We're not, you know, recreating a will. It's something that has been researched and studied and we know works. There's already staff or there's already, you know, services maybe already in place. So we're not building the capacity of any service provider, even if the grantee is the service provider. So training and professional development, you know, this is not NYCP again. We cannot provide professional development for the service providers. So if it's the language teacher who is, you know, providing language and they want to go to NIEA or a language summit in DC, we cannot use the funds for that type of professional development. Now, if you need professional development for admin staff, then that would be a part of the structural costs or admin, like the 20%, that wouldn't be direct services. So you know, be very mindful of including professional development in your budgets. You know, we have a professional development competition and other funding that is really useful for adults and teachers, but this funding is not it. Also assisting students and families in signing up for the services. So if you have, you know, I've seen several things like coordinators used or counselors even used, where their primary service is just signing up the students to the service providers. That would again be a part of the structural cost, unless, you know, maybe it might be a position where the counselor might half the time actually provide something that the student selected, like college readiness coaching or mental health, behavioral problems or something, but they're also signing them up for services. And now you can split that counselor's position or that person's position between admin cost and direct service costs, but it still shouldn't be all direct services. Family activities, again, we can't use the funds to have a big powwow or community gathering. That's not, unless it's something maybe you're doing with the students for them to plan, and it's something that they selected that they want to use the funds that's being provided through this for. But it's not something that we're just including in our programs. Everything has to be selected by the students. And again, we cannot force students to select things or say that this service will be provided to all students. The students have to select that service. And then again, marketing to recruit students and administrative activities like traveling to the project directors meeting in DC when we're able to travel again. That would be a part of the 20%. Any type of marketing or promotion or for the project or for the services that you guys are able to have for the students, that's all a part of the 20% and not a part of the direct services. So again, take a picture of this, ask questions about it. A lot of budgets have been coming in with things that are included for direct services that really has nothing to do with what a student will select. Some travel things, personnel, of course, is big, and we're going to keep talking about that, but just make sure, you're fully understanding what is considered a direct service and what is not considered a direct service. Again, you do have 20% of funds to do things that are not considered direct services, but taking, this ACE funding, you all agreed to having 80% of the funds go to direct services for students and allowing choice or options for those students to choose from. Next slide.
And Bianca, we had one question.
Yeah.
And for those who maybe are not seeing your question yet, it's because I know the slides that are coming up next. So I'm saving your question for the applicable slide. So don't think I'm skipping you. But we had a question about, so if they wanted to do some curriculum preparation during the planning period, instead of during the implementation period, would they be able to use funds to develop curriculum during the planning period if they make it openly available, so that they're not capacity building any specific entity, it's just openly available to all their service providers?
So that one is a little tricky. I do believe, this is not considered direct services when you're in your planning period. So in your planning period, you are able to do a little bit more and build the foundations. I do want to know a little bit more how that curriculum is going to be used for the selection choice. Again, it can't be, we're going to do this and give it to everyone. We want to make sure that the service that you are providing is chosen by the students, not the service providers, not the teachers, but the students. So, we can follow up an email about that. But I do think that there's more wiggle room in the planning period, which most of us are in now, for getting things together to provide. And I can see how curriculum can work, but I can also see how it cannot. So, we can follow up on that.
Great, thank you.
Okay. So I know when we went through the budget before, or when we first started talking about this, we were really promoting to do more contracts with the service providers than with personnel. And the biggest reason is because that service that's being provided has to be selected. So with contracts, they can easily be changed. With personnel, it's a little tricky because you're promising a person a job, and then what if none of their services that they're offering is being selected? We cannot just pay that person to not provide services. So, these are some of the things that we should consider for a salaried personnel, what the per student cost should be, the portion of the salary, the portion of the benefits, the portion of the needed supplies. Again, all the services should be with already up and going organizations, or if it's your company or school district, maybe you already have that person hired, and then now whatever extra they're doing for the grant can be, a contract on top of their personnel and their benefits, so maybe only a portion, maybe not a whole full position should be under personnel for that person, but maybe the grant can, pay a portion of it or a portion of the benefits. Again, like we said before, we cannot provide training or professional development for those personnel who are providing services. So a contractor definitely can be an individual contractor. You should also know the per student cost set by the contractor. So, if it's $100 per student, that contractor's wage for maybe the month could change, or if students fluctuate between the months or maybe the seasons or the summer. So it's a lot easier when you do a per student cost with the contractor, so they can know what they're expecting when they sign up for, 10 students or 5 students. Again, you cannot pay for professional development when they are a contractor. So if you have, a language provider, you cannot send them for professional development conferences with this funds. They definitely can use the funds they've received from being paid from the services for professional development, but they cannot use the grant funds directly for it. And then the supplies and transportation. So if you are the contractor or service provider needs supplies and transportation, all of that should be included in the per student costs. It's not like if you're going to be our service provider, we're going to, promise you a car or a laptop or something. The cost should be agreed upon, and everything that's needed for providing that service should be included in the cost within that contract for the contractor. Next slide. So these are the questions that you probably seen from me in emails if I reviewed your budget. And it's really what we have to figure out. A lot of you still want to have personnel providing services as direct services through the grant. I do think that it's possible, but there's certain things that may need to be agreed upon, like what are we going to do if your students request a service and expect it? And feel free to provide answers in the chat. All of this will be recorded. We do want to hold a meeting with our attorneys just to make sure we're able to meet the guidelines of ACE, and still we're trying to find a middle ground, because we know that it's hard for a lot of the communities to do what ACE intended, and we're trying to make it work. So, we're giving you our best suggestions, and it might not work for your community. We definitely don't want you guys to give the funds back or stop the project. We're trying to, figure out how that middle ground where we can make the project work for your community and meet the standards that Ed set for this project. So also we have to consider too, what if a service option is canceled? I think that in several different communities and programs, there's people who were multiple hats in their position. So, I have seen some budgets where they split like the admin to do like counseling service and admin work. So of course, um, the funds are split between, the 20% and 80%, but now you have, kind of a reason to have them as on personnel, because you're able to use them in your organization another way. And maybe that funds is not still all the way paid out from ACE, but maybe other programs, or, they can work for your company in other ways as well too. So there's also a consideration where instead of having yearly salary employees, to have maybe like hourly employees where, they're only paid by certain hours, depending on the students. But this is something you definitely want to consider, because of course we don't want to hire people and not fulfill what we promised them. We don't want to take people from their jobs, and we can't continue supporting that position because students aren't selecting them. So we really got to have these good plans in place on how we can, utilize that personnel either for the project or other program needs, or, make it maybe a part-time position or something where you have a little bit more flexibility. And I really hope that there are, some fiscal officers on the line too, so they can, voice their concern and opinions. And, maybe it's possible to do like hire a person only for 6 months to see, how the position's going. But it is really concerning when we see so many salaried positions for direct service costs, because again, we cannot say this services is going to be for every student. The students have to select it, and if it's between a counselor and getting an iPad, you might think that the students are going to select the counseling, but maybe all the students select getting the iPad, so we cannot really, hire the personnel without having the backup plan or contingency or other uses for that person. Again, under NYCP, it would be completely fine and allowable, but under ACE, it's not. So it's a lot easier if it's contracts. But if personnel is the only way to go, we definitely need to have that contingency plan together and really talk things out. When you are sending your budget information to me, I am not the only person that you are convincing. There's a lot of people who have eyes on this competition and project, and they're looking to see how great it is or how bad it fails, so there's some microscopes being used, and we just got to make sure, we're doing what we're supposed to do with these funds so the competition doesn't end. So, if you have any questions, please send them forward. We are trying to, work this out and make it work for your project and community. And so here's a couple more questions I didn't get to. I started blabbering. I'm sorry. It's the native of me. And then what if the staff need time to write or create curriculum and lesson plans? So again, a lot of you should be in your planning period. I know there's a couple of people who should be ending their planning period or already did, but may not have sent me the needed material to start implementing. But if you need more time in your planning period, you can have up to 12 months. So you can ask for more time. If you did not ask for a no cost extension, planning period, then we can still work with you. But you cannot provide direct services and be in a planning period at the same time. So, please make sure that we have our projects aligned and our services in place before we start implementing. and really take advantage of the planning period to make sure that we're getting that community insight, knowing what services we should provide and what kids are looking for. And I definitely was a big advocate for having the planning period. It definitely gives us more time to be ready and meet all our goals that we intend on meeting when we're ready, So the last question is, what if the staff needs training? Again, this is not a training grant. This is not a professional development grant. We are not building capacity with the funds. So anyone who's providing direct services cannot use these funds to receive training or professional development. Now, if you've maybe, let's say, created an app to provide to students, and you have your project director and your admin support, and they need some training on how to use the app and make sure it works, and some training like that. Yeah, you can definitely do that. You can do that during the planning period. And if more training may be needed during the implementation years, you have that 20% for admin costs. But that training or any professional development, even the professional development that we provide, so the travel costs to the project director's meeting, time to talk to me or be on these webinars, all of that should be included in your admin costs. And again, if you have suggestions for training because you cannot use your funds for training, please send them to Sarah or myself. We definitely can see what we can come up with the resources we have to give some training, or if we can get another grantee who's doing great at that to be spotlighted for a talking stick, then they can provide that service as well too. So please, if there's more information or training that's needed, I know we're getting close to time, but one thing I wanted to suggest as well too was that, we are promoting contracting, and maybe there's individuals who's providing services that doesn't have the knowledge to be an independent contractor or just never done it before. Maybe we can provide some training to help with those individuals, so please think out of the box on how we can help make this project work. I want it to work for your communities. We know it's complex. Trust me, I know it's complex. I have nightmares about this competition sometimes. Sorry, Donna. But I'm not the biggest advocate because it is really changing so much what we've been used to with Nycp to something brand new. And there's not any template or project before that's like it to, help guide us. So it's all brand new, and we're just trying to, figure it out with you all as well. So we'll figure it out during this planning period time. Next slide, or Sarah.
Yeah, and I was just going to let people know we are right at time, but I know this is an important topic and we don't want to cut off any of the information. But if you do need to hop to another meeting or another commitment, please know that we are recording the session. And so I will get that link out to you just as soon as possible, so that if you do miss any of these last bits because of another commitment, you will still have access to all of that information.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, so paying staff to provide services. Again, this is something that is allowable, but we just want to make sure contingency plans are together and it makes the most sense. I cannot, just approve something because you said all the students are going to select it, especially if it's something that I'm looking at the other options you're offering, and, a summer camp or something that looks very entertaining, it's kind of hard to think that they won't select that over counseling or tutoring or something. So yeah, maybe some kids will need it, but saying all of them will, it's kind of, you know, a lot to say the least. But we have to remember, you know, we cannot supplement, not supplant again. So if you already have that language class, now offer that language class, you know, I don't know, during the summer, on the weekends to a younger age group, you know, starting language earlier has its studies. So definitely you can expand. As long as, you know, it's adding to more of what's already being provided. And then a non-allowable example is the school already provides native language class and you pick up the cost of that teacher. So we're not just going to say, oh, we got these funds, now we can, you know, redirect the salary from the language teacher and just use ACE funds to cover the salary. Nope, you can, you know, maybe add another language teacher because there's so many people that want that class. So now, you know, you need 2 language classes, or now that teacher needs to work, you know, 2 or 3 days instead of just the 1 or 2 days that they were working before. So allowable, kind of what we mentioned, school does not offer any native language classes. You hire and pay a teacher to provide those classes. Yep, we can do that. The school only offers native language classes for high school. So you hire to pay a teacher to provide those classes for elementary and middle school. And then you should allocate funds by per student costs. So, you know, make sure that you have that per student cost for each service provider, and also the maximum cost that you're giving to students or families. You know, if you're saying you have 5 options and each of them costs $300, but the maximum that a student can choose from can only equal to $1,000, then they only really can make 3 options out of those 5 options. So just know, you know, your flexibility and the maximum allowability per student, and keep time and effort. So, you know, if we go back to the example of having to pay personnel hourly, you know, if it's a counselor and they only, you know, meet with students during their lunchtime for 30 minutes, you know, so maybe 2 students a day, like you have to make sure that it's documented, you know, why they're being paid this much. You know, our department does monitoring, but we're not the only ones that come looking for these funds. I know you guys heard of IG and other auditing firms that can come, and they're going to look into and ask way more questions than I can probably even think of. So again, please make sure, you know, you're not only documenting and telling me things, but you have everything on record. If an audit ever comes up, or we ask for documentation later on in the future. And also keep track of the number of students you serve, the number of students you serve in total, and the number of students that each contractor or service is providing services to as well. Next slide.
So that moves us over to some questions. So I have a few questions that I was holding for this particular spot. One being, so if a grantee, say for ease of math, has $100,000 for their implementation year, and so 80,000 would need to be for direct services, but they end up not spending that full 80,000, are they still able to spend that full 20,000 on project costs? Or would they have to then spend even less than the 20,000 on project costs to keep the percentages correct?
I think that what you plan for admin should stay, so that 20% of the total award per each year should stay at 20%. But, you know, that question comes up, and I do think that you would have to make sure that we are still spending that 80%. So if you need budget revisions, or if there are other services that students or parents are asking for, then we need to add those services. You can change services, which is, you know, a little bit more flexible than NYCP, but please make sure, you know, you have reason to, and it still fits your scope. So, you know, if everything is all around science, now we don't want to say, oh, we're going to add a language class when your whole application and all your other services are just science. So, you know, please make sure that we are spending the funds and revising as needed, working with our community, our parent liaisons, and getting feedback from our families to make sure we're providing the correct services.
Great. The next one has to do with travel. So Doug was sharing, you know, his students live in remote villages. So in order to really be able to provide any services, they either have to fly the students from the village into town or fly an instructor out to the villages. So in that instance, would the students still need to be selecting transportation in from the village as a service option? And wouldn't they be able to cover the cost of their teachers flying out as part of that service?
So yes, transportation for the students is definitely allowable as an option to select. So, you know, if one of the options for them could be, you know, to select to come into town for the service. But now if it's a service provider who's going out to the remote villages, I believe that should be calculated in their contract or their service cost already. So please be mindful that, you know, especially in Alaska, I know that prices are very high for travel or for things like that, but that should be calculated and included in that cost for that service provider. So for example, let's say you have a language service provider and 4 students signed up for that language service. Maybe $1,000 per student for that cost should just be included just for travel, because it's going to take, you know, $100 each trip, and they're going to visit that student 10 times, you know. So that per student cost for that service provider should include their travel costs to the student. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. And if Doug, and I think Pamela also, if that did not quite get to your question, please let me know in the chat box and we can always regroup. The next question, you know, how can you know what services will be selected before submitting a budget? The budget lines for services are anticipated based on our community history. And I can kind of quickly note that, yes, I know I met with many of you when you were working on your budget revisions, and we talked about how these are estimations based on what you anticipate. So remember that you can submit additional budget revisions like Bianca was saying. So once you start up implementation, you may realize, oh, service A that I thought everybody would be so interested in really isn't being selected by as many, but service B that I thought would only be of medium interest and number of students selected is greater. So you may need to do some budget revisions to make sure that you're expending your funds and using it how you need to. So you do have that availability to continue to make those. On the topic of budget revisions, we did have the question for those who are nearing the end of their planning period, when would they, is there a specific due date that you would like them to send in those budget revisions prior to implementation? So for instance, if their planning period ends April 30th and they plan to start implementation May 1st, when should they turn in a budget revision?
So there's 4 things that should be turned in once your planning period's ended. And here they are. So I know this is your slide, but I can take it over.
No, go for it.
But, you know, we got to make sure that you're turning in all of this when you're ready. You should get approval or confirmation from me. And then you should be able to go. So we might still have questions or have to work things out, but please make sure you're receiving, you know, an email confirming I acknowledge that you're ready to start and that you turned in everything that's needed to be turned in. And yeah, the budgets right now, the budget, we're not looking so much for the numbers more than for understanding what belongs where and what is allowable. So we want to make sure that you understand what's considered a direct service, what's considered admin costs, where indirect cost is supposed to come out of. You know, if you're including supplies and training and direct costs, we're asking why, or we're trying to tell you, you know, that should go somewhere else, or you have to kind of think differently. We're trying to get you guys out of the framework of Nycp, and also trying to just meet the program requirements more with this budget revision than with budget revisions that's going to be looking more at the numbers in the future, if that makes any sense. Like, we're we know this is super complicated. We know that the budget wasn't something that we had to break down in the application. So for the to meet the program requirement of this competition, we're asking for all of that now. So that's why we're working with you. We're trying to get more of the understanding now. So, you know, we're just all on the same page and we know how to use this ACE funding. And so, you know, when if you have to submit a budget revision, you know, based on actual changes as well, because a service provider, you know, backed out, or you need more kids signed up for supplies, so you actually need more supplies cost or something, you can submit that at any time throughout the year besides September, the last month. So, you know, we'll be actually looking at the budget in a different lens in the future, to say the least. But right now, we're just trying to get everyone to understand how 80% of the funds have to go to what the students are selecting, and, you know, making it fit into that box or category. So again, this is, you know, the description of the operational service selection process will be needed before you can start implementing services. A description of the operational parent involvement in selection and feedback process. So again, what I was mentioning on before, parents, something should be in place if you're sending out a survey monkey, if you have an app that's collecting this information, if you have a person passing out papers at a community event or so forth, that process needs to be explained. You know, how this students are selecting the services that's being offered needs to be explained. And then a sample of the written agreement between you and the service providers, that needs to be approved as well too. I know we have sent out, we had a webinar and sent out a template for this. I really encourage you to use it, adapt it, you know, make changes as needed. But we'll need that before you can implement services. And then a description of the process that will be used to choose students to be served in the event that the demand of services exceed the available capacity. So if you have less services, I mean, more kids than services that you can offer, then we got to make sure that there's a fair process in place on how you will select those students. So all of those things should be submitted to me, very clear, even if you included it maybe in your application already. If you're in your planning period, I need all 4 of those things again before you start implementing. And yeah.
Great.
Next question or next slide.
Yeah, so the next question, we're talking about teachers. So they were talking about our example regarding a native language teacher. And so if the grantee isn't a school, can they actually hire and pay a teacher? Or does the school have to hire and pay that teacher and then be on the line for their salary if not enough kids sign up? And I can speak to this from a school district perspective. I have a background in school districts. So it's going to depend on that school district. For some school districts, no, they would not want you to hire a teacher that's going to provide courses within their school district, whether that be during the school day or after. With other school districts, they would be open to that type of partnership where you would be actually the employer of the teacher that's going to provide those services. For the second part, as far as if the school is going to be one of your service providers and you're going to contract with them for this teacher that's going to do native language classes, this is actually fairly similar to how things work for secondary classes anyway, particularly elective classes, that there's basically a number that they have to reach for the class to make. And this is why some of those pieces that we covered in the contracts webinar are so important, because yes, if say 3 kids sign up for that class and the per student cost is $1,000, then it's not going to be cost effective or cost even doable for that class to happen. So it hasn't made. So the school district would most likely opt to not offer that particular class, just like they would if if they were offering some other elective. If not enough kids show interest, that class doesn't make. So that's why it's really important in that contract to kind of put those pieces in there so that you're not only protecting yourself, but you're protecting those providers so that they also don't get into situations where they're required to provide services that really cannot be held cost effectively. So they want to think through, okay, what is the minimum number that we would be able to offer this course at this particular cost per student? And if they go over that number of kids, wonderful. But knowing that minimum is going to be super important. The next question was kind of harkening back to the travel. So I wanted to just touch back on it as far as, that it would be more cost advantageous to send an instructor out than it would to maybe send 10 kids in. Absolutely makes sense. One plane ticket is going to be cheaper than 10 plane tickets. So it's just going back to what Bianca was talking about then taking the travel expense for that instructor and making sure it's in that provider per student cost. And so that would be included in that per student cost for that particular service. As we go through, just double checking here. I know some of you have provided some feedback and comments. Know that we are taking those down and we are going to review that as a team. But in the interest of time, I'm trying to stick with the ones that are particular questions so that we make sure to cover those. When you say services selected by students, do you mean services that are selected by students and parents? Students may not fully understand why all services are selected. So yes, that is a collaborative decision that families should be making with their students, keeping in mind that particularly, for a kindergarten student, if mom signs them up for something, they're probably going to show up for that. If I'm a senior in high school and mom signs me up for something that I was not part of that collaborative decision, I'm probably not showing up because I don't know why I was selected for that or I didn't want to be selected for that. So just keeping that in mind, because even if the families select a service, if the kid never shows up for it, then you're still in a pickle of, are you paying someone to provide a service to a kid that doesn't exist? So really encourage you to help them make those collaborative decisions and help the students understand why their families feel they should participate in certain activities, even if that's not something that they themselves would naturally sign up for. But just making sure this is another place where document how the students and families are signing up so that you can show how that was done and that it was a selection made by the student and or their family. All right. I think we have gone through all of our questions. Thank you for so many of you sticking with us over time. I will just very briefly pop up our end of event poll while I wrap here. If you don't mind fast fingering in your answer for that, I would greatly appreciate it. We do have some other events coming up that I want to make you aware of. We do have our ongoing distance learning sessions. And we also have our February talking stick coming up. So join us again on both the NYCP and demo talking sticks in February. I'll also send out another reminder. If you did not get my reminder email this month, please reach out to me. I'll share my information there as well.
Yeah, and just to tag in on the talking stick session, we know that NYCP and ACE is pretty different. So the next talking stick session, we're separating the two just so we can dive in a little bit more project specific, maybe for a couple of months, just until we can, get things more sorted out and not confuse all of NYCP with the complexity of ACE. And we can really, answer more questions and provide you guys the attention and resources that you all need. Please hang in there. We are, here for you. I am back. I apologize for delaying things. I was out all of December and a lot of November for personal and medical reasons, but I am here. I'm healthy. I'm alive. We're getting the budgets done. We have new staff on board, so things are looking better and it will be brighter. And we will figure ACE out together, you guys. We'll get it done. Any questions that I cannot answer are, Sarah has been so helpful, especially during the time I've been gone. And, we've been taking things to the program attorneys. I have been advocating for you guys. They hear me stress about how this is, very complicated. And, the more information I have from you guys, the more resources and information I can provide. So please, we are hearing your concerns and any other issues or ideas that you have. Please definitely send them forward to, Sarah or myself. And we're definitely trying to figure this out. And if anyone's trying to implement or extend their planning period, please reach out to me. Also, if there's any project director changes that needs to be done, please submit that information to me too, so they can have G5 access. And there's a couple of project directors who may not have a level of effort inserted from their application. So also, if you never submitted like 50% or 100% of time, please update us with that, or I can, send out an email to those individuals. But let's update the people who need to be contacted so we can make sure that you're receiving all the necessary materials. Thank you, everyone. And we will see you in 2 weeks for the talking stick session.
Yeah. Well, and the information is up there on the slide as far as the contact information. I know many of you may be working on some changes to your budget based on feedback from Bianca in regards to your budget revision. Remember, you can always reach out. We're happy to help talk you through that. You can reach out at that oie@seiservices.com and we can set up some time and talk through or answer any questions. If you have any other questions, feel free to pop those in the chat and we will try to follow up with you outside of this event since we've already gone over on time. But I would ask one last favor, that there is a feedback survey that our wonderful tech host Rashad has been popping in the chat box a couple of times. So if you don't mind clicking on that and completing that, it takes 2 to 3 minutes, but it's super, super helpful for all of us. And if you hadn't had a chance to respond to the poll on your screen, I would encourage you to do that as well. Fast finger in that answer before you head out. We appreciate you taking the time today, and we'll talk with all of you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.